They have our morals and paves the way for a new history.
All of us are extreme observers of the Ukraine war compared to the normal citizen, right? But there are a lot of us, and the drone warfare has maybe been one of the things that have impacted us most because of all the video images, and it really brings the war so close to us. And then we had this transition from the drones either observing combat action or actually dropping munitions straight onto the enemy. And then we had this new element that started last year, about 6 to 7 months ago, when the FPV drones entered the combat. And since then, it's kind of been this mystery. No one really knew how to analyze this, in my opinion, because we had no idea about what the capability really was. But it has proven to be very, very powerful, and both Ukraine and Russia has done quite a lot of effort to enhance this capability and the production of the systems themselves. And recently, there's been some claims. Just I think in November, the Russians claimed they were going to produce 6 times more FPV drones than Ukraine had just mentioned they would produce per month, and that's kind of what Daniele's starting point was, wasn't it, Daniele?
It was exactly that, but essentially I've been since the start of this war, but even a year before this war, but I was always quite affected by the fact that I saw a lot of propaganda on different areas around Russia that was coming out every time in the West, and affecting a lot also the ability of believing in ourselves, in our capability, and also in our moral ability to defend democracy. And so this was one of the many things that I started to look at, because I questioned to myself, if they are able to essentially deploy to produce, not deploy, so many FPV drones, then why they are procuring from China, because there were already news about this drone coming also from China. So let's say, why we don't see this massive amount of drone strikes, despite there are a lot, and Andrew can confirm that every day is very tough for him and Geek follow all the strikes, which are very well published and very much published on Telegrams, which I try to avoid in the last 6 months because it's terrible to geolocate those happening, because the images are, of course, very strong sometimes. So I start to dig in, and I generally started by looking at the report from Twitter of Andrew, and just looking at the numbers, doing some plots, and try to understand if there was some trends. And then I went back to Andrew, who told me, but you should look at the infantry, because at the infantry you will see probably kind of Russian being the same or even higher. And he didn't any analysis. He just, by looking and mapping each case, he was by bull eye able to say what we saw then in numbers. Of course, we had I had then the possibility to open the database and discover, I think, a small treasure. And Andrew, please, again, thank you for your work, because I think what you are doing is very valuable. We can improve it. I will try to help you as much as I can, but I think it's a big resource of information.
So this is really interesting, because it's very much like the scientific method, and you know, data is absolutely key here. And if we want to make evidence-based policy decisions, or we want to have behavior that is based on something, then it needs to be based on evidence, really. You know, intuitions aren't good enough. And so what Andrew Perpetua has done is got that raw data. And my goodness, can I just say, Andrew Perpetua must be the hardest working individual in OSINT at the moment. He must have a time machine, because goodness me, he achieves a phenomenal amount. But that data is absolutely diamond, and it just needs someone to be able to analyze that more formally, and that's exactly what you've done. And then, as you say, like, what you want is someone to go away and critique that in the same way that peer review and scientific journals, and then another scientific piece of research will go out and build on that or critique that or whatever, and then eventually we are moving towards a more and more accurate understanding of reality. Sorry.
No, thank you. Thank you very much. And honestly, one thing that I didn't expect was the explosion of the thread, which overwhelmed me in the first few hours, because essentially my mobile, which is not often so pinged, was just in continual notification. So I was a bit scared at the beginning. But the main point is that I wanted honestly to put this out mainly to try also to first of all initiate a debate on the topic. And one thing that I'm a bit regretful is that I didn't put. I tried all my best to don't, because many people just read the first part and they say, oh, a lot of vehicle loss is very good, we are winning over. No, please look at the infantry, look at the missing data, because we see that there is a huge gap 3 times on the drone usage against the vehicles. There are a lot of speculation we can make, but there is probably other work that need to be done. And I don't want to wish cast, and I don't want to say that everything is sorted on FPV side. So my aim was to raise awareness rather than, but of course also saying, well, maybe we have to be careful. We have to continue to support this activity, but we have also to recognize the weakness of the enemy, and the weakness is the propaganda, because the more propaganda they use, this means that the more problem they have. And even the fact that they are so openly accepting help from China from these from this type of munitions, I think is a very big signal that they are not able to do what they said. Yes.
So there's something else to add to that, and I was talking about this yesterday in my news, one of my news videos, which is when Russia announced that they are making, or they are going to facilitate civilians constructing drones to the tune of 32,000 annually by 2030. There's a couple of really interesting conclusions or speculations you can take from that, which is, one, they're expecting the war to be going to 2030. I mean, if you're putting a production thing in place that isn't like, this is not, we're going to produce like barrels for artillery, which you're going to have to buy capital and do, that's a big old thing where you might put a 5-6 year plan in place. When you're just talking about random people building drones at home and giving to the army, then that's weird that you'll be taking that to 2030. By 2030, we're going to have 32,000 a year. But as you say, with this idea of going to China, if they're saying we are going to do this, then it means that they need them. And if they need, and that's not a huge amount of drones either, if they need that many drones and they go into the effort of trying to get them from their civilian population, it means they don't have the required amount of drones as it is, and they don't have plans for that going forward outside of, they need 32,000 a year from civilians. So yeah, some of this data really, the question is, as you say, you've got the Ukrainians saying that they are creating 50,000 drones a month, and the Russians at the same time saying they're building 300,000 a month, right? Are both of those correct? And what evidence can we bring to justify our belief that they are either correct or false? And that's what you have attempted to do.
I tried to show a thread here by Samuel Bendit that went into this topic, actually, about how the Russians are producing the FPV drones, and he basically talks quickly about what you can observe from Russian Telegram channels about how they produce them, and this doesn't look like a very professional setup from my point of view compared to what I've seen.
So sorry, Erlen, if I can add something. I just spoke with a couple of volunteers who operate FPV drones, and they told me that sometimes also they have to do some soldering, because for transportation or for save some money and buy more, they buy FPV kit. So it's really like a RC airplane. They buy the kit, it arrives packed with everything that you need, and of course you need someone with some skill in soldering. not PCB soldering, of course, as you see in some of other video from Daniel that you probably have the tweet. And so even Ukrainian have to do this, honestly. But if you analyze that images, you will see something. This was from Daniel, and if you go at the end, there is like that one. If you go up, no, this is a new iteration that the Russians say that is too complex. It's just a relay, just to tell you how much electronic they understand. That one. You see those yellowing, those are soldering done by someone that doesn't flux his motherboard, his PCB very well, so he's ruining a bit the contacts, and this can create issues, of course. I mean, for a suicide drone, probably it's fine, but this tells you that there is a lot of integration by people that never have soldered anything or have very, very small or but it's very new to the area. Go on.
I have taught soldering to 8-year-olds before, and even my 8-year-olds did better soldering than that.
Good.
Ouch.
I wanted to try to not be too harsh, honestly.
I'm not showing this thread to make it like so that the Russians are the only ones doing this on the front line, because I know that the Ukrainians are as well.
There's a group that I follow that they just recently started their own FPV group. Before then, they strictly did artillery. They have M777s, and they're now getting into drones. But they just started their drone program, and they've been posting the process of starting this program. And a lot of the things that you see in these pictures are the sorts of things they were posting as they were getting their drones together. And they worked side by side with Magyar and with a few of the other bigger drone groups. I think they worked with Achilles as well to get off the ground. I think Magyar was training their pilots so that they would know what to do, and they have like a baseline skill set basically. And I mean, you have to manufacture your own munitions too. It's not just the drones. You have to make your own munitions, and like random soldiers don't know how to make munitions. I'll tell you what. Like the way like some of the videos they're posting were frankly terrifying. Like they take like an RPG and they have to cut off the outside of the RPG with a saw. And that's terrifying.
Can someone answer me this? Because I've seen that one, and you might have this lined up, Erland. But there's that one that has the two the loops of wire, that the idea that if they touch, then it completes a circuit and it blows up the drone. And the idea is that you drive that into something, and that will push the wires together and explode it. Is it really bloody dangerous? Yeah, that's the one. Is it really bloody dangerous for drone operators to actually A, make these things, and then B, like set them off? Because surely if you just trip over, like I've got multiple sclerosis, so I would be useless on the front line. I'd be like tripping. Oh, there goes all of us as I've blown us up with a drone. It must be so dangerous, surely.
Yeah, Andrew, weren't they a bunch of videos of people killing themselves in the beginning of this?
Yeah, people die and lose their hands all the time. There are safeties involved. There's one really interesting video on YouTube. I don't have the link, don't ask me, but there's somewhere where these guys were launching a drone, and they were showing the safeties that they had. And basically what they did is you walk over with your drone. They take off very, very far away from where they are. So you go out, you put the drone on a holder. You put the battery into like a battery pack, but there's like a lanyard that connects to the holder. So when the drone takes off, when it gets to a certain height, the lanyard will pull, and it will connect the battery to the explosive.
Right. Yeah, that's because I was thinking there must be something like that. Can I just chip in with so I have 10 questions that I think are really pertinent to this discussion in terms of who is in the best position now for drones, and where they go with drones, and where we're at. Would it be okay to just quickly rattle them off?
Yep. Let's go ahead.
Yeah, so how I see it is so these are pertinent questions. Which nation is producing more drones? Is there a difference between the approaches and outcomes of each nation with regard to civilian-built drones? 3, which nation is producing a greater variety of drones, and does one nation's drones have greater technological capabilities than the other? 4, which nation is training drone operators better and in greater numbers? 5, what is the difference between the tactical usage of the drone operators and units between the nations? 6, how does the access to quality and time-sensitive intelligence, satellite imagery and whatnot, affect drone usage? 7, what is the difference between the hit rate of each nation? 8, which nation hits more targets and which type of targets, such as infantry, mechanized equipment, trenches, dugouts, buildings? 9, what does a difference in drone targeting say about the position and tactics of each nation? And 10, going forward, which nation is therefore in a better position to have a more effective use of drones? And I think that's a whole load of questions, but kind of that's the totality of what we're seeking to answer when we're looking at data. And we can't answer those questions without the data. And so Andrew's work is absolutely vital to be even starting this ball rolling.
Well, if you go through the questions, I can give you just yes or no on each one.
Okay, let's try that. Who's producing more drones?
I think it's Russia, but it's really hard to tell. It's almost certainly Russia, though.
Is there a difference between approaches and outcomes of each nation with regard to civilian-built drones? So, in other words, who's doing a better job of doing civilian-built drones?
I think Ukraine is doing better civilian-built drones. They're more high-tech and more varied. But I'll answer the next part because you're going to get to it.
Yeah. So, which nation is producing a greater variety of drones, and is one nation's drones, do they have greater technological capabilities than the other?
The Russian drones are vastly more capable. Like, it's not even comparable. It's almost embarrassing how far Ukraine has fallen behind. And I think, I don't actually know this, but I think the reason is because the Russian military is pouring money into it. Because there are certain Russian drone groups that are just vastly more capable than everybody else, and by everybody else I mean literally everybody else. So there's kind of like most of the Russian units and the Ukrainian units are more or less equal, but then there are these Russian units that are way better, like years and years ahead. And they have, I think it's military funding.
They have those components then, and literally the technological know-how that is just that others don't.
Well, they have really high-end thermal cameras. They have better digital connections. I'm pretty sure they're EW resistant. They're just ridiculously good drones, and they've got to be really expensive. Like a normal drone is like $400, and those drones I bet are like $2,000.
So then really the next question would be, do they have more of that type of drone? Like, do they have? Is there a critical mass of those types of drones that is making a significant difference on the battlefield?
They don't post very much of those drones. When they do post it, it's like a compilation of like 10 or 20. But they only post like one of those a week. So I don't know how often they use it, but it's really unsettling the way they use them, because Ukraine has to move at night, right? So does Russia. You have to move everything at night. And what they're doing with these drones is they have ridiculously good thermal cameras. They can see really far out with high definition, and they can see like what type of vehicle you are from like pretty far away, like maybe a kilometer away. They can see what vehicle you are. So they can they can fly at you and say like, that's a pickup, not worth it. That's a pickup, not worth it. This is a tank, we're gonna blow it up, or whatever, And Ukraine can't do that. Ukraine has thermal drones, but their thermals are trash. Like, you can see a vehicle, but you have no clue what the vehicle is, and you have almost no depth perception, so you can't really even tell how far away it is. So the Ukrainian thermal drones they do work, and they do get hits, but it's not comparable. And and taking out that ability to move at night is really scary. And I've heard from a lot of Ukrainian soldiers who are like, this is more upsetting to them than anything else, is losing the ability to move at night.
And well, I guess that leads on to what is the difference between the tactical usage of drone operators and units between the nations? And you kind of answered that in your video thread. And when I spoke to you with regard to, this is Daniele will probably have a lot to say about this, which is the data that he's analysed is very much about infantry and vehicles. But you've said that actually a vast amount of Russian footage concerns dugouts and trenches.
Yeah, they're
Yeah, I'm showing a video that portrays this very subject right now, which is a Russian video of they're just going for trenches and houses and bunkers, really.
But does this suggest that actually there's a lack of artillery ammunition? Because I was thinking this could be one of the things that you could conclude from that. Like, are they doing the job of artillery?
Yeah, I mean, yeah, they are doing the job of artillery.
So the question is why? Is it better, or is it they don't have the shells or barrels?
I don't think they have a lack of ammo. I think it is better to use drones for this sort of thing because you can directly hit the thing you want to. Like with these bunkers, it's more difficult because they're pretty well fortified. It's a giant pile of sticks. Like, let's just be honest. Like, it's hard to get rid of a giant pile of sticks. But with houses, they can, fly into a house, literally hover inside of it and look around for the weak point in the house and hit it and knock down a house in one drone. Like, I've seen that happen dozens and dozens of times. So these drones can be very, very effective at doing this sort of thing. You can fly into a door and knock out the door and then fly into the bunker and blow up the bunker. That happens all the time. So
does one side have better access? Because I've always assumed, or I've been led to believe, that the Ukrainians have much better access to time-sensitive intelligence, such as satellite imagery. But does that make any difference with the usage of drones? Is it just the drones themselves are what give you the intelligence to then go and use maybe other drones or that drone to do whatever strikes?
Ukraine has bad intelligence. Well, I don't know if intelligence is the right word. I don't know what word to call it, but they're bad at it. They're not good at communicating across units, like to one drone unit to their adjacent drone unit. They're really bad at communicating. So, for example, Ukraine kind of shares drone feeds. So if one drone sees a vehicle coming, everybody can see that vehicle because they share the information. And then all the drone units fly a drone out to the vehicle. So, like, if there's one vehicle, they hit it with like 5 drones, and then the vehicle explodes. And then there's another vehicle. They're like, we used all our drones on the first one. So, like, that sort of thing happens. Like, it's really not good. It's very bad, actually.
The flip side, though, is that many people claim that the Russians themselves have claimed, particularly in the Tochnyi area, we've seen intercepts where they say, we're not talking to each other. In fact, the only reason we're communicating with the next unit is because we've got a guy from Wagner and they've got a guy from Wagner who happen to know each other. And that's how we're talking. But otherwise, there's a lack of communication. So I guess that although it can be really bad for the Ukrainians, and I'm not trying to be positive for the Ukrainians, but that doesn't mean to say it's not also bad in terms of communication for the Russians.
Oh yeah, that would be like adjacent unit communication, which is like a different issue. Which I mean, I don't know how good Russia is at that. They're probably pretty bad at it. But yeah, there's you can have the communication between your adjacent units, and then there's the communication between the adjacent drone units, because the adjacent drone unit might not even be your adjacent unit. Because the drone unit may be like a completely different thing. Like, it may not even be the same brigade. Like, communicating with the adjacent unit is probably easier than the drone units talking to each other.
And I guess to wrap up all the last questions into one, I mean, so when I was talking about Daniele's thread, and I said, I think this evidences that Ukraine, that Russia are not producing 300,000 drones a month. And I think we can derive that from the idea that the Ukrainians are actually pretty much on parity with infantry strikes, and they're having many more vehicle strikes and equipment strikes, and then you popped up and said, oh, actually, there are loads of Russian strikes on dugouts, etc., etc. But I still don't know that would go as far as to justify 300,000 a month, and I just don't think we are seeing 300,000 a month translated onto the battlefield. Is that where you would stand with that?
I have no clue how many they're making. It's like everyone I talk to says that Russia has more than Ukraine, and how much more, I have no idea.
Yeah.
Okay, so I wanted to ask Daniele, from your thread and the work you did with it, what sort of conclusions did you make based upon the data, and what kind of data did you actually have to work with, I guess?
Regarding the data, essentially, Andrew created along these nearly 2 years an Excel spreadsheet that contains different columns, and each column has a certain type of information, like geographical coordinate, type of attack, type of the link to the Telegram channel, which most of the time is there, and also description, what type of attack, if was done on infantry or not. So it's quite very well detailed, and also quite well organized in a way that you can use a computer program to analyze the data and try to extract all the information that you need, essentially. And what is very important to underline is, of course, that this is a work ongoing, so there are changes done in the database as Andrew add the new data. And so these mean that when you analyze the database, you have to keep in mind that some stuff can be changed, so you need to adapt. But more or less is very consistent. And regarding some of the questions that Jonathan, and this is the beauty of discussing things openly and in a very constructive way. For example, I partially disagree with Andrew on the technological leap, because it's true that some of the drone that we see have night vision, but we don't see them in the same amount of other type of drones that they used. And regarding the quantities, of course, we need to be careful, because the data that I analyzed and anyone can analyze is based on what we see. If the Russian, for example, I mean, in my personal opinion, after I have talked further with Andrew and listened to his point about the building, I think that possibly, if you remember, there was like a gap in the vehicles. Probably that gap is not that big. I mean, there is a gap on vehicles, but it's probably operational, as Jonathan suggested, and some other commentators said. Of course, Russia use more vehicles, so is more likely to be hit by FPV drones. And potentially, so the missing drone in that plot that you're showing now are moved on another area, which I didn't cover because we don't have clear data on that at the moment, which is building. In my opinion, from what I saw in the data, I'm starting also, you saw Andrew last night, I was working on using the coordinate of each attack and place on a map, try to see which are the hotter area, which are the less affected area by FPV. So by looking at the data and what is coming out, I think at the moment when I analyze the data until December, there was a kind of parity from the data. This means that possibly Russian are a bit ahead of that, and we will continue to push to have more. So I agree with Andrew, of course, on the fact that is for Ukraine is paramount to improve the amount of FPV drone that they can deploy, because of course they may have better quality drone, because the drone produced by Russians, from what I saw, are very, very simple, in some extent very similar to what we saw at the beginning, and in the best case scenarios are equal to the Ukrainian one. They don't use sophisticated technologies. Even the fuse, let's call the fuse that we saw, more or less both the sides use the same approach. Daniel was reporting a use of a relay, which is a very simple component, but the Russian didn't like it because they cannot integrate very well, from the report that he posted on that thread. So I don't see like a technological leap. What is concerning, for example, of drones coming from China, which are made in aluminum, I'm not concerned about the quantity, but the usage of such drones, because many people say, oh, but aluminum is heavy. Yes, it's heavy, but why doing aluminum? Because you want maybe in the future mount more powerful engines, and then using more powerful engines to lift higher payload, which may be very much used for what Andrew was suggesting, so for striking bunkers.
Can I? Are you pausing there, Daniele?
Yeah. I'm giving you way.
Yeah, but just really interesting. Erland, can you show Daniela's graphs again, and particularly the vehicle graph? The drone hits on vehicles. Yeah, so that one. So assuming that the infantry hits are equal, I know they're not equal, but they're not too far apart from each other. So let's just assume the infantry are equal, and let's assume that Ukraine are producing 50,000 a month, and the 50,000 a month translates into December figures, right? So let's just assume. I know there's some assumptions, and then when Andrew says, well, actually the Russians are hitting a lot of bunkers and whatnot, and then as Daniele says, well, this could be because there just aren't the vehicles nearby for them to hit, and I think that there is a lot of we can put a lot of store in that. The question is, does the 241 difference between the Ukrainian strikes and the Russian strikes there, would they translate across onto buildings and trenches and dugouts? Or like just statistically speaking, or are there vastly more? Because if what Andrew is saying, that there are loads more hits on dugouts, but those loads more hits equate to say 240, then actually what Daniele is saying there is that in reality we have a parity in at least the successful hits of the drones. That's not to talk about whether there's any percentage difference in failures. So then, as Daniele then implies, we have possibly good justification that actually Russia aren't producing 300,000, but there is pretty much about the same amount of production. The question is, how many more buildings are being hit than the difference in the December figures of vehicles hit between Russia and Ukraine? Do you understand what I'm saying?
Yeah, no, totally. And effectively, by speaking with Andrew, listening to your when you essentially reviewed my threads, and having some feedback from other people expert in this area, I had the feeling that if there is a so big gap, there are several possibilities. But one is, of course, there is a gap. The other one, that this gap is just due to the fact that resource is used, because I'm sure 100% and I think we are all on the same page here, that there are no drones left somewhere in a warehouse because Putin don't want to use too much power in Ukraine. This is a lie. This is completely wrong, because this type of ammunition, as Andrew and Erland show in those terrific videos, are very simple and very effective. So if you want to obliterate, completely destroy a trench line, you take 5,000, 2,000 of these drones, if you have enough ammunition, of course, and you will launch on your enemy. You don't wait for it. Now, if they are not doing this at that level. So I mean, so what I want to say is that it's possible that the vehicle, we need another category here, which is dugout structure, something like that.
Yes, I was just going to suggest that's exactly what we're missing. But then it's difficult to know what are successful strikes and not successful for dugouts, because actually
that's something that I'm not very interested in, and because we are not discussing the effectiveness of the weapon, but the usage, because the usage will tell us how much.
Not quite, because actually with the December figures, for example, those are successful hits, and it doesn't take into account all the other hits. But if you are then counting just drones sent at a trench, then actually that's not a like-for-like comparison. So I don't know if that would work.
No, you are. I understand what you mean, because it's different a trench from a tank. But the main issue is that the problem is that when is the source the problem? Because the source is a video that often you don't know if a building has been hit other time. You can guess maybe, but probably you are going to be shown just the one that make everything collapse. So if you start, and sometimes it's the same for vehicles. You don't know why that BMP was there, or if it's not moving, it's likely that has been destroyed after something before happened.
Yeah.
So how you consider that? And so when I started this, I said to myself, I don't want to enter in the rabbit hole of discussing efficiency of the weapon, because we don't have first-hand data. We don't have an officer that tell, oh, each date we send 10 drone and 5 hit the target. Because, for example, when I was discussing this on Twitter, a lot of people gave me different numbers. Some people gave me 10%, some people gave me 50%, some 70, some 60. I have to say that most give me between 50 and 70, not lower than that. But I don't know who believe, because that number will be also important in understanding from this figure if these are the successful hit, how many were before, or essentially on the top. But I think I want to use this analysis to extrapolate a trend that can somehow tell us who has more and who is using more. And this is something that we may be efficiently extract from Andrew's data. And but again, in terms of efficiency of the weapon, we don't have direct data from the military, of course. So it's very, very a more academic discussion at that point. It's like, oh, well, I see these more like that. It's a speculation, I think.
We have a question from a couple of viewers, some questions, and I want to pull them up now. So the first one is from Kellen Dunn. Do we have an idea on how much help Russia is getting from China with respect to FPV drones? And Andrew, do you know this, or anyone?
Well, in terms of FPV drone, most of the components that they mount are made in China. So somehow they are getting access to these drones, to these components. But in the same way, because these are dual use components, I mean, this is a very, you can buy these on Amazon right now if you want. So how actively the Chinese government is pushing component to their side is again is debatable. But what is interesting is that we are seeing drone produced in China, and that thread that you showed me a few days ago is the first sign of something made outside Russia in China for Russia. That is a direct help, and that is not concerning by the fact that it is a first. We will see more. It was just a case. Is the quality so bad that they will not order more? We don't know. We will see. We will see with the data that Andrew will fire to us. I think personally that the European Union should do something, not in terms of sanction, but in terms to help in the production of FPV drone.
Yeah, I mean, Ukraine has been asking for help for a while. I mean, I don't know if it's like the Ukrainian government, but people who have been manufacturing the drones have been asking for help. I know that there are groups of people helping them. There are. I'm afraid to get into detail, but I know that there are groups helping them. But I wish. I'm not going to say what the groups are. I know, like, I'm trying to avoid detail, but the people helping them are what I would consider a medium-sized company helping them, whereas I wish we had a government-sized entity helping them, if you know what I mean. So, like, because we're really not talking about that much money. I did some math on it, and it's about $2 billion is what Ukraine needs to complete their drone program. If you gave them $2 billion right now, that they would have all the drones they need for the rest of the year. That is a reasonably small amount of money.
Someone should ask Elon Musk. I'm sure he'll be up for it.
We could easily give Ukraine $2 billion. We give Ukraine a lot more than $2 billion all the time. Like, the EU is debating on giving them 50 billion. You know what I mean? Like, we could give $2 billion towards drones. Like, it's something we can do. Like, this isn't something that costs like $100 billion or something like that. It's just two. And what they need is quantity, and not just quantity. They need to be able to put out the purchase orders to attract entities that can manufacture them efficiently. And
yeah, by the way, this video is the drones you were talking about, Daniele. So they are aluminium stamped frames. And can you kind of comment on what that means?
Yeah, this would be the first thing that I would do if I have zero knowledge in composite and I need to do something fast. And I mean, we used to produce a receiver of rifle with stamping. It's cheap, it's easy, and cost very much nothing. Of course, weight a ton. But the problem is that you are doing this because you want then to have a more resistant and stiff structure to use a bigger motor, or it's just because, I mean, this is what they can get. This is still something that we don't know. And of course, without having those drones on my desk, I can't say much more. But for example, many people were very concerned about the serial number. I'm very less concerned about the serial number, because the way on how these drones are integrated and the way on how, when I say integrated, I mean assembled, is not going to follow any standard probably that we are used to associate with serial number. Because normally when you have a weapon system or a complex system, that has a serial number, because each serial number has a series of components, has like a list of stuff that went into it. Each operator, you know exactly the history of the construction of that item. And I don't think these drones have been produced at this level of sophistication, honestly. So it's very likely that those serial numbers are needed just to count them and ask them for the proper amount of money.
Erlen, that's a really interesting article. So I've just found it online while you guys are talking, and it's really interesting when Russian propaganda doesn't really help their cause. So on the one hand, this sounds absolutely brilliant for the Russians. So an Izvestia report said, or at least some commanders have said, that they only 10% of Ukrainian FPV drones reach their target. Well, if that's the case, then Ukraine must have an absolute bucket load of drones, because if Daniela's stats and Andrew's stats are correct, and that is video evidence, and you are getting those figures, and those figures only represent 10% of the drones, then actually Ukraine have way more drones than you would think. And I don't know, sometimes the Russians say things and it can be a bit of an own goal.
Yeah, that's interesting. I need to read the article later, but yeah, good example. We got another question I want to put up before we move ahead, and it's we hear about ammunition shortage, like shells and mortars. Is there also a shortage of HE munitions for FPV drones? I guess munitions in general that is possible to use with FPV drones. And I know, Andrew, you talked about the Ukrainians having problems with fuses as well.
Yeah, their fuses applies to the dropped bombs from like the quad drones dropping things. So there's a real shortage of fuses. It's why Ukraine breaks open the DPICM shells. They don't actually want the cluster munition part. They just want the fuse, because the fuse is like pretty decent. So Ukraine has a just a shortage of fuses, and a fuse is unfortunately difficult to design a safe fuse that works reliably. So that's an issue that Ukraine has. With the FPV drones, it's a little different because you're using a RPG round as your primary thing, or else you can use plastic explosive, which is pretty plentiful. So with an FPV like kamikaze type drone, they probably don't have an ammo shortage, although the unfortunate thing is that there's no mass-produced, purpose-built munition, and that is a real issue that's I wish someone would address, but it seems like no one really feels like it. You'd need a government to do that. Ideally, the Ukrainian government, but the Ukrainian government doesn't appear to have any interest in doing that. So it would also be nice if like the American government did it, but the American government doesn't want to either. So I'm not really sure how you deal with that. I know that the United States also doesn't have munitions for their own drones, which is amusing. So let alone drones for Ukraine. So yeah, this is just an issue. There's no, these weapons are so new that there's no purpose-built munition for them.
I seem to remember that much earlier on when we first started seeing our RPG warheads strapped to FPV drones, that there was, I can't remember, I could be pulling this out of my posterior, but it was something like they had 10,000 warheads, RPG warheads in Ukraine. But of course, that's going to be the sort of munition that will be readily available around the world, and you should be able to secure quite a lot of those. I would have thought from a number of places, you know, historically, there's just been a shed load of those built. So I don't know whether there'd be a shortage of them, although there must be absolutely chomping through the stockpiles of those.
I imagine so. Yeah, there's so many RPGs out there. I believe they manufactured like 10 million warheads or something like that, like the Soviet Union. So there are so many. Like, and also you don't have to use one of those warheads. The warheads are good because there's a shaped charge; it can go through armor. But if you're not hitting armor, you can just use like plastic explosives. A lot of Russian drones are just like a big block of plastic explosives attached to the drone, and it makes just a gigantic explosion, just huge explosions, and they're pretty deadly. So you don't have to use the RPG warhead. The RPG warhead is just convenient because it's like a decent enough shape to work with, you know, and it has a shaped charge.
I wanted to mention that recently I saw a video of a Ukrainian FPV drone, and I can't show that video here because we would get banned immediately from YouTube. But where a Ukrainian FPV drone detonates mid-air, and it certainly has some sort of fragmentation round on it. And is that something you've seen more frequently lately?
Ukraine has been doing it pretty infrequently, but they've been doing it for a while. They started doing this during their counteroffensive in the summer. I've only seen like a handful of videos of them doing it, though.
The Australian cardboard drone there was footage of them, you know, one of their, I guess, advertising, if you like, videos had them trialing out Airburst munitions from those. So, you know, so when I talked about that video, someone was saying that could be one of the Australian ones, but we haven't really heard too much about them for some time.
Yeah, I haven't seen too much of that either. But yeah, the Airburst drones, they came from a period of time of experimentation. And at the time, Ukraine was looking at dive bombers and airburst drones. These were FPVs, so dive bomber FPVs and dive bomber airburst. The dive bombers, they managed to destroy a lot of tanks and BMPs with dive bombers. It was actually very impressive. Madyar was doing a bunch of that with his group. You could go back and watch those videos if you want. He was also doing level bombing with what's it called? Not a Predator. I always call it a Predator. It's not called a Predator. Whatever. With their level bomber drone, they took out a bunch of vehicles with that thing too. They don't use that much anymore though. But yeah, the airburst drones were an experiment. I would assume the experiment failed in that they don't use it very much, but they do use it from time to time. It is an option. It's like a tool in the toolbox, but it's just not used very often. I'm not sure why. There could be all sorts of reasons why it doesn't work. It could just be unreliable. Like when you click the button, it might not explode. That would, after when that happens a few times, you get frustrated. You don't want to deal with it anymore. Things like that. Like who knows? But the dive bombers are still used, not as much anymore, and I don't see them using them on vehicles anymore, which is weird because they did destroy a lot of vehicles with dive bombers, but now they use them more on infantry. I believe the 82nd Brigade, their drone guys, used a whole bunch of dive bombers when they were attacking Verbova, and Madyar was using a whole bunch when they were attacking Staromayorsk. So, but yeah, the dive bombers are still there. The airbursts are still there. They're just not as common.
Okay, I think we have to let Germinate do his news report now, and then we could sum up with some questions after that news report. What do you think?
Just by the way, in case you want to share this, I've just shared privately a video of that cardboard drone doing airburst, just in case you wanted to show viewers at all.
We can do that. It's not gonna get us banned, right?
No, it's just on a box. This is what I was talking about. This is like kind of their promo video. So that I mean, that's the capability, but I don't know. Apparently they did strike some airplanes, didn't they? In one of the Russian bases is one of the theories that they use these to do that. But you can see it exploding above and air bursting below. But I don't think I've seen these. They probably used them up really quickly once they got them from Australia, and I don't know if they've had many more.
Daniele, I know you had some something you wanted to show us before we end the stream.
Yeah, this is very small, and there are two things that I want to show you all. And the first is how it looks like the database of Andrew. So just let me to share with you the complexity of this. Okay. So let me see. Okay, you should see something.
Yep.
So this is the database, and you can see how long and how many rows there are. And you can see it's categorized by date, different indicator, icons, coordinates, title, description, text file. So this I'm opening this. I save this as a CSV file, and then I'm using like a tool of VS Code, which is called CSV Rainbow, which allows you to divide in categories, so you can easily navigate and see through it. You can see how big it is, how many details there are, how many. Of course, you see sometimes you have better description, sometimes not, but mostly is huge, immense.
But
so,
I want to note that there is a link to the source for the entries in all of the entries, right?
Yeah, everyone. I think essentially everyone has otherwise it's not there. I mean, yeah, you see, for example, this is one of the things that Andrew was discussing last time. You see, this one is one of those cases where Andrew, because Andrew is the one that does this most often, is essentially taking one video and sectioning it. So this was one video, probably 4945. So this was one video, but you can see how many attack it contains. So essentially, this means that if you if you don't do this, you will count as an one single attack, but look how many has been. So for this reason, the work that Andrew does is very intensive and very, very, very difficult, because sometimes you have so many things to analyze that it's time consuming. And sometimes you don't have even the possibility to geolocate, so you don't have geolocation, but most of them have. For example, now I'm coding. I essentially spoiled you what I was doing. I was trying to essentially visualize the attack. These are Ukrainian attack that for which I have a geolocation. So they are absolutely not all of them, and I'm trying to put on a map. Now I'm using Python. I'm using Jupyter Notebook, because these in future we can host on a website. Anyone can read that out. You can see the code is quite easy, but the problem is accessing to the data. So there are other part of the code that allow me to section essentially little bits the database. For example, in this case, you can see I selected only blue drones with date and with a certain geolocation, and these are on infantry, these are on vehicles, and there is also other type of filtering that I apply. For example, I exclude duplicated videos, because Andrew load everything, and if it's duplicated, it will tell you. So you can definitely understand if a video on any side has been duplicated. And so this code essentially arrange the attack on a map, which I found is very interesting, because once this is fully developed, we can have a very detailed description of where the attack were done. Now, at this point, I'm plotting all at once. My aim for next week is understand and learn how to have like a cursor here or somewhere, like in order to move it across like date, so you can see them pop up in an additive way. So this would help us also to understand the level of destruction that we see, for example, from other footages in the same areas, to understand how the FPV drone has been used. And just to give you another hint here, going back to the data from, if I just search for trench, you can see that this is also very well indicated. So I will, for example, I will be able to instruct the code to look for keyword trench and select this data. And of course, I have to verify that I selected all, if I didn't select it twice. So it's a lengthy process, but the end results is those data that I show in that thread. And you can't do this by hand, because it's simply impossible. I mean, it's a waste of time, and it's really impossible. I don't know even how this amount of data has been constructed in such a consistent and nice way. And this was just to give you a glimpse of what means creating a database, keeping it updated, and also use it, because it's not just you select something and then it's done. Even when I select the data, I have to verify that everything has been, for example, one of the problem now that I have is that some doesn't have a geolocation in numbers, so has a name. So probably I will have to run a code that reads this name, inform me about this, and then I just replace it for the Solidar. I will put like the coordinate of Solidar from Google. So in this way, I will have like a consistent database. And that's it. I mean,
on behalf of the brave.